lot of time.
Oh, sorry.
Should we start again? Or are
I
we
don't know
okay?
what, it just didn't do it.
So let's start again.
Okay. I'll do it quicker this time.
Take two.
What is the word?
Neurodegenerative.
Hi, everybody. Today we're extremely lucky to have Professor Dominic Rowe with us. Professor Rowe's area of expertise include motor neuron disease and Parkinson's disease, amongst other forms of neurodegenerative, that word, Dom, disease. As the inaugural professor of neurology at Macquarie, he's involved in research into the cause and therapies of these diseases. Professor Rowe is a clinical neurologist and researcher with a long-standing interest in neurodegeneration. He has published on clinical, genetic, and biological aspects of Parkinson's disease, as well as MND and other fields of adult neurology. Dom is also involved in clinical assessment and management of many patients with PD and MND and other neurodegenerative diseases. It's a word I can't say. Dom was also my husband Robert's professor, doctor, clinician. And so, Dom, you have a very special place in my heart and my family's heart. I just need to start off by saying that. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for that kind, lovely introduction. It's a real pleasure to be talking to you this morning about motor neuron disease and other aspects.
Thanks, Dom. What do you like to do when you're not a brainiac, Dom?
I'm very fortunate. We have a farm up in the Hunter Valley, and so I raise cattle and grow grapes and vegetables and chickens and ducks and guinea fowl and all sorts of animals.
Did you say cows?
Yeah,
good.
but also pole Herefords, and so I cook a lot. So I spend a lot of my time cooking. So I'm not much of a baker, but I do like to cook. I'm a terrible thief. So if I have a dish or a meal that I particularly like, I'll try and recreate that. So, you know, we don't go out to eat much anymore, a little bit, you know, maybe 5 or 6 times a year. But so I spend a lot of time on the weekends preparing food to put on the table. I listen to a lot of music. I play a bit of piano. In a former life, I used to play a lot of music. And other than that, if 100-meter piss farting around was an Olympic sport, I'd be able to represent Australia in that. Okay. So I'm very good at switching off.
All of those, that's what I was going to ask you. All of those things are, especially cooking, I find, is meditative. So you're actually in the moment. Yeah. You can only think about what you're doing in that moment.
And it's also improvising too. So I use the palette of food that we have available, because, you know, 20 k's out of town, you can't just pop down to the corner store if you're missing something. So and, you know, I started working in commercial kitchens at the age of 17. So I've spent a lot of time observing how food is put on the table. My dear friend said to me, I think somewhat as a bit of a smackdown, she said many years ago, she said, women cook to nourish, men cook to impress.
What? Yeah, kind of agree with that.
Oh, for sure. Piffle.
Robert was not a very good cook, but when he got MND, he decided that would be the time that he'd like to learn to cook. But I couldn't let him near a knife. So anyway. Yeah,
look, it's a great thing to put a meal on the table with all the produce stuff that you've grown in your own garden.
Well, in our family, it's an expression of love.
Yeah.
It's how we nurture. And I have to say that I was talking with someone the other day, and that's something we found very difficult in our family, is that the way that we show love and that we come together is to sit at a table and eat a meal together. And
Yeah.
that was one of the things amongst many that was taken away from us when Robert became ill,
Yeah.
because he couldn't share. I was at dinner last night with friends of ours and mine, and Greg has MND, and we're all sitting at the table, you know, having a great time. And he's sitting up there and watching us, you know, and that's a big thing.
Well, it
being part of
amplifies,
society.
it amplifies the awful impost of this dreadful disease.
What do you normally call it, Dom? Is it a bastard of a
worst,
disease?
yeah, the worst disease in medicine. If you were going to design, the worst disease that you could imagine, it would be this.
It will be Phil Camden, whom you know and I know well, walks around the whole time saying that Dom Rowe says it's a bastard of a disease. And what's the other thing you say about only good people get MND?
That's true.
Yeah, it is true.
It's not universally true. You know, I've
No.
looked after some people who've
There are pricks everywhere, Dom.
Yeah, and but generally, you know, it occurs in people who, by and large, well, no one deserves motor neuron disease, whether you're a nice person or not, but it generally occurs in people who tend to be giving people.
It's interesting, isn't it? Dom, why do you do this?
Well, I've been asked that question many times, and you know, the only useful reply to that is that you don't pick motor neuron disease by choice. It picks you. And so my journey with motor neuron disease over my medical career goes back to my first medical tutorial as a third-year student, and my medical tutor, Danny Steele, who was one of the many fantastic mentors who I've had through my career. And in pretty much the first tutorial that so as a third-year medical student, you don't know your
ear hole from your arsehole, Dom.
That's right, yeah. And so he took us in to see this woman who was lying in a darkened room in North Shore Hospital, and he said, "This is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. This is the commonest form of motor neuron disease. You wouldn't wish this on your worst enemy." And so that she couldn't talk, she just had a peg put in, and she was in a bed. So it was one of those sentinel imprinting moments as a junior medical student. Then skip forward many, many years later, you know, we saw the occasional patient when I was doing neurology training at North Shore Hospital. And again, at North Shore, I had tremendous mentors and teachers and valued friends. But we hardly ever saw patients with motor neuron disease. And, you know, when I was a medical student in 1986, motor neuron disease was 1 in 500 as a cause of death in Australia. It's now 1 in 200. So there's been a 250% increase in motor neuron disease in Australia. Now, that's not a diagnostic thing. This is what kills you when you die. So death certification is pretty accurate in Australia. And from 1986, it's been coded using a nomenclature system called ICD-10. So from 1986 onwards, we've captured the number of deaths in Australia from motor neuron disease compared to the whole population deaths. And in 1986, as I said, that was 1 in 500. It's now 1 in 200. So that's what kills you when you die. Now that cannot be genetic. It's environmental. It is environmental.
Yes.
So, you know, skipping forward into when I finished my neurology training, my background before going into medicine was in biochemistry, and I really wanted to pursue understanding the molecular basis of neurodegenerative disease. You know, I have an impenetrable belief that understanding the biology of these diseases will lead to therapies that dramatically slow and stop them and or prevent them. So, and we've seen this time and time again. in medicine, in neurology, in neuroscience, in any field of medicine. So as I was finishing neurology training, I got awarded the Australian Fellow at Queen's Square position from the Australian Association of Neurologists. But prior to that, I'd gone to sort out my PhD work, and I ended up selecting to do work at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston with one of the doyens of neurodegenerative disease, a dear friend and mentor, Stan Appel, who's now in his late 80s. And so when I worked at Queen's Square, before I went to Houston, I used to do the MND clinic there at Queen's Square.
Oh,
and
okay.
it was a terrible experience. You know, it was depressing as all get out. It was all about death and dying. The doctors hated it, the nursing staff hated it, the patients hated it, the families hated it. It was just atrocious. So we then moved to Houston in the mid-1990s, and at Baylor, the emphasis in Stan's MND clinic was diametrically opposite. It was all about learning how to live with motor neurone disease, about what weapons we can employ to make every day a little bit better, and working with patients and their families in this battle, because it is, as you've experienced, it's trench warfare. It's not shits and giggles.
It ain't shits and giggles, mate.
And so seeing Stan's clinic in Houston, which was the first time I'd seen a multidisciplinary clinic working, we replicated that in Sydney when I returned to North Shore Hospital. And we started out small. We managed to bring the allied health team along on the journey. So the respiratory guys, the allied health people, and we ran motor neurone disease clinic initially once a month and then once every 2 weeks at North Shore. And it was all done on good intentions and pro bono. And that was a very useful learning curve. So that was the first multidisciplinary clinic in Australia, to my knowledge, was 1999 at North Shore Hospital. We, along with Susan Mathers down in Melbourne, pioneered the use of non-invasive ventilation. So systematically surveying for hypoxemia and hyperventilation, which is a dramatic intervention in motor neurone disease, and it's still vastly underutilized. People don't get access to non-invasive ventilation, access to expert, clinical assessment and care is still disastrously poor.
Well, it's only 27% of anyone with MND has access or uses NIV currently.
That's not in our clinic.
No, not in yours.
Yeah, we're over 60%.
As a rule.
60% penetrance of non-invasive ventilation. Everyone is assessed and we watch, and we have, our own internal thresholds for when we offer people non-invasive ventilation. And NIV is not for everyone. Not everyone wants non-invasive ventilation. And, working with Dave Berlowitz, who won a Medical Research Future Fund grant with me and many others, we're trying to unpick the shamefully low penetrance of non-invasive ventilation in Australia. Unfortunately, care in Australia is extremely hodgepodge. Anyhow, so at North Shore, we ran motor neurone disease clinic, and we set up some of our research efforts. In 2007, I was appointed professor over here at Macquarie at the age of 42. So I was the second appointment here at Macquarie in the Faculty of Medicine. So Macquarie has made a big play into medicine from 2007, and then a huge play in 2012 into neurodegenerative disease, when the university cut loose money for us to go and hire the best young people around Australia to come and work here at Macquarie. We now have a research and clinic team of 82 people. It's about a $13 million a year enterprise to keep moving. We get no we get, for the clinical care, we get no support from federal or state government.
Yeah.
Shamefully, we get no support from Motor Neurone Disease New South Wales.
Yep.
So we have to I have to fundraise the $600,000 or so it costs to run our clinical effort here at Macquarie.
Yeah. I was speaking with Gavin from Fireys, applying for Fireys the other day. I'm going to come to the Blue Mountains this year. Yep.
Tremendous lad.
He's a tremendous lad. And yeah, so I'm going to help as much as, because he really wants to up it a lot this year too. So I'll see you in the Blue Mountains.
Yeah.
So
we have many teams involved in the basic biology of motor neuron disease, from genetics and genetic discovery, the identification of new genes, the translation of those genetic abnormalities into biology, and using various different models, principally a zebrafish model, the Danio model, which helps us understand the basic biology of cells, neurons and supporting cells, the glia. We have a lot of proteomic work that's done here at Macquarie with Julie Atkin and Albert. But we really need to focus on the 900-pound gorilla, which is, why has motor neuron disease increased by 250%? And what are we doing to our environment that's causing this?
Is it, just being devil's advocate, is it just that we have better reporting now and better death certificates now? No. So you're definitely seeing them. So is it more concentrated regionally, do you think? Or yeah, that's the thing that bugs me, as you know.
But even in Sydney or high density populations, see, the thing is that in high density populations, you're actually more invisible than in rural and regional Australia. So if you're in Griffith, a city of 28,000 people, and you get motor neuron disease, everyone knows it.
Yeah.
I've had 2 patients who lived 5 doors from each other, just up from where you used to live in Turramurra.
I know.
In Burns Road, Wahroonga, 2 patients, 5 doors. They didn't even know that they existed.
I worked out last year that there were 5 of us in a very similar area in Turramurra, Wahroonga.
Yeah.
5 at the same time. I mean,
I have 2 patients from Davistown in the Central Coast who have lived 50 metres from each other for the last 20 years. You can throw a cricket ball from Chris's house to Susan's house and land it on a roof. And they both have sporadic motor neuron disease. Now, up until recently, you couldn't necessarily say that, because sometimes sporadic motor neuron disease actually has a genetic cause.
oh.
And it's only recently that we've been able to systematically look for the known genes. So here in our clinic, every patient who comes through with seemingly sporadic disease, we test for genetic abnormalities, and only 2% of the time do we find a faulty gene, because we're really good at our index of suspicion is really high. So we go looking for genetic and hereditary, family tree evidence that there's a genetic cause of motor neuron disease. But still, 1 in 50 people that we see through our clinic, we find a faulty gene, which is another story in and of itself. But it means that sporadic motor neuron disease, which is 90% of motor neuron disease, we are not spending enough money on.
No, we're not. And we don't have enough money to, it's just not recognised because it's still such a rare disease.
It's not a rare disease.
I know that, but that's how it's seen.
Come and sit in my fucking office.
I know.
That's the first F-bomb of the day.
Yes, Dom. Well, I chair the, what do I chair?
This is not a rare disease.
It's not a rare disease.
We've got to stop including that in the first sentence of anything that's written.
I agree with you, 1,000%.
Disease.
But that is how it's perceived.
It's only a rare disease because arbitrarily epidemiologists have set the threshold for a rare disease as a prevalence of 1 in 10,000.
Oh.
Now, the prevalence of motor neuron disease in Australia is estimated to be 1 in 14,000 because the average survival is 27 months. So if you have a disease that's just as infrequent, like multiple sclerosis, but you live 27 years, 10 times longer, more than that, 20 times longer, you have 10 to 20 times the number of patients because they're still alive. So we arbitrarily make up this number of 1 in 10,000 and say this is a rare disease. In 2020, and there's a little bit of discussion about the figures, but in 2020, 747 people in Australia died from motor neurone disease or were killed by motor neurone disease. About that same number died from COVID. In 2020, in New South Wales alone, 260 people died from motor neurone disease. In the same year, 280 people died as a result of fatal road traffic accidents. When you die in a road traffic accident, there's a crash investigation unit that studies the make and model of the cars, the time of the impact, who was in the car, who was in the other car if another car was involved, toxicology, criminal charges, blah-de-blah-de-blah. We know that the vast majority of deaths that occur on our roads are caused by young men driving too fast, pissed and or stoned and or tired. That's the vast majority of deaths on Australian roads. If you die in a motor vehicle accident, it's studied to the nth degree. We spend millions of dollars on the crash investigation unit. If you get motor neurone disease, no one cares.
No one gives a fuck, Dom. The other thing is, you said to me once about how much money was thrown at COVID in that same period of time. And we had more people dying of MND than there were of COVID. And
shameful. Well, COVID was an excuse for Morrison and his criminals to shovel money into their pockets.
I do love you. But I want to know how you really feel. Don't sugarcoat it.
We spent hundreds of billions, not millions, billions of dollars on shit that was preposterous. You know, you remember, let's go back to early 2020, and we shouldn't get sidetracked, but it is an important point. Everyone was saying, you know, you had to wash your hands and you had to bump your elbows. It was a respiratory virus. It was spread by aerosol. And they were saying, oh, you had to sing happy birthday to yourself while you washed your hands. You had to use hand sanitizer. Complete bollocks. Perspex screens everywhere.
They're still up.
There's no rationale for the use of a Perspex screen when you've got an aerosol virus. They don't work. So, but, you know, we can't wind the clock back. What we can do is learn from that experience. And, you know, the people who were seen as experts at that time weren't necessarily the people who should have been spoken to. But, you know, we can't, well, all we can do, it's okay to make mistakes. That's fine. Everyone makes mistakes, but we need to learn from that period. We were very fortunate in Australia that we had such a low death rate. And that was, you know, as a result of the public health measures and what have you. But we did sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater in some respects.
But if we had that amount of money thrown at us over a 12-month period, a lot could be done.
Absolutely. And, you know, targeting funding and spending money on stuff that's important is, of course, critical.
Do you think that the figures, because the only ones we've got it from 2017, 2,000 per annum?
Well, no, there's never been an accurate population-based study of motor neurone disease in Australia. We need to fix that.
We
So
do.
we've got the Mind Oz registry, which grew out of AMNDR.
Yeah.
And I was one of the founders of AMNDR 20 years ago. And the Mind Oz consortium, which is sort of trying to make it a patient-based driven initiative, is a, you know, tremendous initiative. But we know that opt-in registries are inaccurate. We need to make this a notifiable disease.
How are you going with that?
Well, it's a very slow process, you know. So if you get chlamydia after a
Big wild night on the town, Dom.
yeah, right. So if you
Yeah.
get chlamydia, that's a notifiable disease.
Yep.
You get tracked down by the Department of Health. If you have Hep B, Hep C, HIV, you know, monkeypox. Monkeypox is a notifiable disease. Do you know how many people got monkeypox?
I've never met anyone with monkeypox.
80 in Australia. 80.
Okay.
So there are some infectious diseases, and rightly so, because of community safety, then that needs to be a notifiable disease. And I get that. But there are also compulsory registries, so the cancer registries. If you get a skin cancer cut off your skin, a melanoma, a BCC, an SCC, you know, early stage SCC, BCCs never shorten your life. And even though, you know, the big inroads into breast cancer support is tremendous, but with screening, a lot of breast cancer that gets identified is not going to be breast cancer that's going to threaten anyone's survival.
No. Whereas
So,
at the moment.
and you know, I know that the McGrath Foundation does amazing work, but are we giving state governments and federal governments a free pass by funding support structures within our health service that should be funded by government and not philanthropy? No, I get it. You know, Glenn McGrath and the foundation have done amazing work over 10 years in providing, I think now 250 breast care nurses around Australia, and that's tremendous. But, you know, is that there was an article that landed the journalist in a great deal of hot water because he looked at the percentages of the money that's raised that's spent on, say, advertising.
I read it.
And overheads.
I read it.
It created a bit of a shitstorm, but it still is a valid discussion to have. We got very political very quickly.
Dom, that's us. Some of us attended a Friends of MND in Parliamentary House last year, and there was a lot of, Susan was there, a whole lot of us went down. 3 people with MND got up at 2 o'clock in the morning to get to Canberra, and yeah, 27 politicians had replied in the affirmative, and 2.5 of them turned up.
Look, I've to be frank, I've pretty much, well, not given up. Given up's the wrong word.
Using another pathway, maybe.
Well, you know, 20 years ago, I met with 3 consecutive New South Wales ministers for health to talk about motor neuron disease services, sort of like this was way before NDIS, 10 years before NDIS, trying to produce coordinated, flexible, integrated care in the community for people with this tragic disease. And I won't say who they were, but it was an exercise in futility.
Yeah.
And it was only after the 3rd Minister for Health that it sort of really, because I'm a bit of a slow learner, it sort of sunk in that the Department of Health has no discretionary money at all. And so that's when I started my fundraising efforts 20 years ago. So for the last 20 years, every year, I raise money that enables us to look after people in a timely fashion using the best management possible, whatever that is. So, you know, we now we now look after more than 200 people here at Macquarie, 205 as of last Thursday.
Oh, God.
And so when I moved here in 2010, it was 60, and I thought that was busy. It's now 205. We're pretty much the only functioning motor neuron disease clinic in Sydney.
Yeah.
Now, and it costs. So my lessons from North Shore, and I have many lessons from North Shore, and it's still an institution that I love dearly, but it became very obvious that I wasn't going to be able to achieve what I wanted to achieve at North Shore.
Yeah.
And so here at Macquarie, we pay all the clinicians. I pay my respiratory physician, I pay my physio, my dietitian, my speech therapist, my OT. I pay for a full-time nurse consultant. So, you know, if it's about money, you know, begging for money is the easiest part of this job. You know, people say to me, why do you fundraise as much as you do? Last year, we raised nearly 10% of all of the donations to Macquarie University. 10% came to us in motor neuron disease. So, and the vast majority of those donations are small amounts. It's $10, $50, $100.
Yeah.
And professional fundraisers don't like that community fundraising necessarily, because their return on effort that, you know, so every single donation, $100 or over, I write to that person and thank them and tell them what we're doing. So I personally write to them and thank them. And, you know, you don't, there's no free lunches. And so we raise a hell of a lot of money. As I said, our research and clinic effort here is about a $12 to $13 million a year enterprise. And philanthropy is a absolutely critical part of that. Every year we do a big fundraiser in the middle of the city. For the last 2 years, we've had the Archibald exhibition and the New South Wales Art Gallery help us with that. This year we're off to new digs to the W Hotel at the end of June.
Okay.
So, and we raise money because we have to raise money. If we don't raise money, we can't look after people. We even though at Macquarie it is a private hospital, but if our patients don't carry medical insurance, I pay for their admissions. So I pay for their stay in hospital, and we pay for all the ancillary things like putting in pegs or experimental therapies. We subsidise patients' treatment with tofersen, which is the first genomic therapy for SOD1. We have 5 patients who are on SOD1 antisense therapy. Lyndall's been going for 2.5 years now.
It's amazing.
On tofersen, which is amazing.
It is amazing.
We also provide in-house genetic counselling, and we pay for genetic testing. You know, I mentioned before that we systematically look for all of the 43 genes that are thought to be involved in genetic motor neuron disease. That's funded by one of our generous donors. So my genetic counsellors are paid for by donation, and our genetic testing, which costs a lot of money, is done at no cost to the patients. So there's no cost barrier. If a patient gets sent to a genetics clinic at a public hospital, their wait may be a year or 2, whereas we see people within a month.
Look, when we were going through this and you were explaining it to me, it made me really angry, but I was too busy caring for a dying husband.
You're in the shitstorm.
Yeah, I was in the shitstorm.
Right in the middle of the shitstorm.
Right in the middle of that, in COVID. But I just find in a society such as ours, which is a very wealthy society, which has capabilities that, you know, we're having to privately raise money to care for people who have one outcome, which is they're dying.
Yeah.
And that, you know, there's no, apart from you, there are no care protocols across the country for caring with someone with MND.
No.
Can I tell you how many times I've interviewed people and they have been delivered the news that they are going to die without a support person in the room?
Well, that's shameful.
Well, they're your colleagues. And that pisses me right off. So there are so many holes
Well,
besides.
you met quite a few of my colleagues.
Yeah, I have. I met 8 of your colleagues in 12 months. And
remember,
they're pretty much arseholes.
we transferred Robert out of the care of one of my colleagues at the SAN hospital to my hospital so that he could die.
I know. Because the care that he received in the last few days at the SAN, I have to be careful I don't get sued, but it was not appropriate. And so at the last minute.
Suboptimal for the patient's requirements. How's that?
Thank you, Dom. So in the last few hours of him dying, we transferred him from the SAN across to Dom so he could have a beautiful death, not an awful death. Yeah.
Well, I told him the first time we met that I'd look after him.
And I promised.
He didn't trust me when we met.
He didn't, but he fell madly in love with you and he loved you. It's funny how, yeah. When are we going to Dom? When are we going to Dom? He'd wake up every day. When are you going to Dom? Not today, love. Let's just get you out of bed. Yeah, that was cruel. So there's a lot of, and one of my friends who has MND at the moment in Sydney, she had to go to hospital for a peg. She was in a room by herself. She couldn't ring the buzzer. She needed help. She couldn't call out because she can't talk. In the end, she had to use her phone to ring the main switchboard of the hospital to be put through to the nurses' station so someone would come into her room and help her. And they're the kind of...
That better not have been my hospital.
It wasn't your hospital. I would have rung you. But those things, I hear those stories all the time, so we've got to do better on care for the people who are living with this.
Well, that's sort of extremely poor care lies directly at the feet of the doctor who is responsible for your friend's admission to the hospital.
Yeah, I know.
So that's and you don't need me to tell you. I mean, I was very straightforward with Robert the first time we met, and it took him more than a month, maybe even 2 months, or maybe never. To believe, and however, he had a lot of fallacies in motor neuron diseases. One of the major fallacies is people say you don't have any pain, which is just
he had terrible pain.
But we sorted most of that.
Yeah, we did. Sorted most of it.
You became an expert at narcotics.
I did, mate. I was so good at it. Said to my mother, just chill, nothing else to worry about.
Yeah, well, it's funny because people say, oh, well, we shouldn't be using these drugs. Well, why not?
Well, why not? Because the man was screaming in pain on the floor at 3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. Do what we got to do.
And doing simple things well, managing hydration, managing bowels, managing mobility. Bowels are incredibly important and not necessarily handled very well, but you need to keep that moving along. Otherwise, everything literally turns to shit.
Well, it does. And I was giving some advice to someone the other day who had MND. And I had so much good advice. Anyway, 48 hours, he's a happy lad.
Yeah.
You said one day a lot of people become neurologists because they don't like to get their hands dirty, but in fact, it's all about poo and wee. Yeah. I'm going to let you go because you've got things to talk to people to see, but I want to know 2 things. First thing is, are you hopeful?
Yeah, you bet.
Why?
Absolutely. Well, we know over the last so we're the only site in Australia. We were the first site 2.5 years ago to deliver tofersen to patients.
Yep.
And we're the only site in Australia part of the ATLAS study. So the ATLAS study is looking at patients with SOD1 and monitoring them biochemically before they develop any symptoms to see whether they need to start treatment or not. Because if you dial back that pre-symptomatic window in genetic motor neuron disease, you can dramatically change the natural history. So Now we're going to be able to cut and paste that strategy for other genetic forms of motor neuron disease. It's going to be a bit trickier in diseases like C9orf72, which has a much more complicated biology.
Yeah.
And we were one of the few sites in the world at that initial trial called the WAVE trial to try and silence C9orf72, which unfortunately fell over last year.
Yeah.
So, but understanding the biology of how these genetic abnormalities cause motor neuron disease is the crux. And once we understand that and can work out how to modulate that, we're going to turn genetic motor neuron disease for people who carry these faulty genes into a chronic, indolent condition that won't affect people's lives. If we can slow motor neuron disease by 50% at the time of diagnosis, we can improve people's average survival from 27 months to 10 years. Now, imagine if I'd been able to say to Robert, you know, in 2021, it's okay, we got 10 years. That whole perspective changes. So that's the first thing, is the new therapies that have been pioneered over the last couple of years. We need to be able to make these therapies available to patients.
Yeah.
I have a patient who's flying up from Victoria once a month to get tofersen. Now, Monash have just got their tofersen program up and running. You would have seen that.
Yep.
You know, we've been doing it for 2.5 years.
Yeah, there's a lot of buzz with patients.
That's one thing. Second thing is access to timely genetic counselling, IVF, and pre-implantation genetic testing. So that over the next generation, we should be able to get rid of all of the genetic forms of motor neuron disease. It's our only strategy at the moment for prevention, is IVF and PGD. We have 3 babies born to our clinic from patients who carry a faulty gene, but the babies don't. That's a cure.
It makes me want to cry.
So those babies will never get motor neuron disease, whereas one of their parents carries the faulty gene and they will get motor neuron disease at some stage. So that is a cure. And in this generation, we should be able to enable patients to get access to genetic counselling. So currently we need to change the law in Australia. So there's this bias against people who have a faulty gene in accessing insurance.
Yeah.
And this needs to change. This is not a fair thing. And, you know, I could bang on about this for quite some time, but that law has to change, and that will change with lobbying politicians, although that's, you know, like I've said before, it's like nailing jellyfish to the wall.
Yeah, mate, get your head and whack it really hard at a wall.
Yeah.
Until someone, and this is a terrible thing to say, but until a politician or someone extremely high profile, known Australia-wide, gets MND, there's not going to be a whole lot of change.
Well, there is, and there has been. So Neil Danaher and the Fight MND crew have done an amazing job.
Perhaps they're extraordinary.
It is a little bit parochial, but nevertheless, Neil and the crew from Fight MND have done an amazing job over the last 10 years in revitalising the research sector. And, you know, it's tremendous to see what they're funding and their initiatives from the sideline. So that's another reason for hope. And this is echoed again in Queensland, you know, with MND and me, and various other funding bodies around the country. So that's a reason for optimism. Increasingly, we have sophisticated setups enabling patients to get access to early phase trials of therapies that may change the natural history of sporadic motor neuron disease. So this is the 900-pound gorilla.
Yeah.
We need to actually tear this 900-pound gorilla apart.
Yeah.
Try and work out where it occurs, why does it occur, is it preventable? So that's another thing that is a cause for optimism. And, you know, our clinical care gets better and better and better. We need to work on the medical fraternity. So the sense of nihilism in the medical fraternity around motor neurone disease is gargantuan.
Yeah.
And, you know, you've experienced as did Robert, unfortunately, the misdiagnosis. So I was on the phone this morning to the husband of a patient who was recently diagnosed with motor neurone disease at the request of Ray Hadley, who's been one of the really tremendous supporters of us here at Macquarie.
Yeah, he has.
Now, the story that this young lad told me about his wife's diagnosis of motor neurone disease was sad. Nearly 40% of patients with motor neurone disease have an unnecessary operation.
Yes. Yes. And mainly neck and spine.
This young woman had slurred speech and a weak hand, and the neurologist involved sent her to a surgeon to relieve thoracic outlet syndrome, which clearly doesn't cause slurred speech. So education in the neurology fraternity is important.
It's actually more than important, it's vital, because so many people I speak with, their journey to diagnosis is 1, 2, 3, in one case I spoke with recently, 5 years. So something like dysorphin is not going to be a benefit to those people when it's taken so fucking long for them to be diagnosed.
Well, the young woman who comes up from Queensland, from Victoria, sorry, she basically had to ask for genetic testing. And then when her gene abnormality came back as positive, she had to almost bludgeon the initial neurologist into referring her for, you know, tofersen therapy. And then there was no one at that stage in Melbourne who was offering tofersen therapy. No. So she came up here to Sydney. Now that's changed in the last month. And, you know, this is time dependent, you know.
Yes, it is.
The clock is ticking. It's not something that you can just sit in the corner and say, oh, yeah, we'll come back to that next year. You're dead next year.
Yeah. And that's the thing, that you're dead next year. And that's the thing that I'm forever saying, because I've got a group of about 100 people behind me that I represent with MND. And when I'm speaking with academics, etc., I may be a little rude, I may be a little sharp, saying my people are dying now. We can't afford for you to faff around and do what you're doing.
Yeah, well, you know, that I think comes with exposing young neurologists to this field. And but you know, like I said right at the beginning, you don't pick MND, it picks you.
No.
And so, you know, attracting young neurologists to this field, making them see why it's an important field, that we can and do make a difference. So the nihilism that patients come to me with their diagnosis of motor neurone disease is completely undeserved and, you know, deleterious. It actually, I think, amplifies poor outcome.
Well, it does. I mean, I know just how angry we were when we stormed into your room. It wasn't your fault that we'd been treated so badly, but you must get that over and over again. And
look, I do, and you know, sometimes that's directed at me personally, you know, over my career, but you know, I think the golden rule, if you try and adhere to the golden rule, which is treat people with the same kindness and respect and compassion that you would expect if the role was reversed.
Amen, brother. Yeah.
So, you know, in the last 14 years, I can only think of one patient that I had to share the diagnosis of motor neurone disease, and she didn't have anyone with her. So she's a very clever person from the pharmaceutical industry and was sent here for nerve conduction studies for carpal tunnel syndrome.
Oh, God.
And it clearly wasn't carpal tunnel syndrome. So, and she knew that I knew when we did the study that it was something more serious than that. And she said, look, this is something more serious, isn't it? And I said, well, you know, it is. Why don't we find some time and we'll sit and we'll have a little talk. So she came into my room and I took a full history and examined her, and, you know, her husband, Russell, was otherwise occupied overseas or whatever. I don't know, but I had to, you know, she knew that I knew that something really bad was going on.
Yeah.
So I almost never share a diagnosis of motor neuron disease when people are by themselves. I can tell you time and time again. So I'm looking after a young lad at the moment, Will, who was not only told that he had motor neuron disease when he was by himself, he was given his gene test result by himself.
Jesus Christ.
That was positive, and he has a newborn child. So, you know,
if I talk, I'll say really rude words. Yeah.
well,
See, it's just
we managed to you know, get out the defuculator and sort out the circumstance a little bit and put him back together. But the psychological trauma from his interactions with 4 neurologists in the lead up to him coming over here for tofersen therapy at one of the other major hospitals here in Sydney, this young lad was told that they can't do tofersen therapy.
they can't, or they don't want to.
Well, they said they couldn't, and in fact, because he works in the political sphere, he made an inquiry to the Minister for Health to try and work out why they couldn't do it. And the hospital and the neurologist quickly backtracked off their original statement. But
it's too hard for them.
I guess, I don't know. I can't understand the rationale of, in fact, one of the neurologists involved against the published evidence sort of poo-pooed the idea that tofersen works at all.
Yeah, well, just
so gaslighting him.
Yeah.
Poor so I don't understand where that MO comes from. To me, it is an anathema to deal with people's well-being in such a flippant and cursory fashion.
And also, when there's no hope, you need hope.
Well, there's always hope, and you know, as I said to Robert when we first met, no, tomorrow's not a given for any of us.
No, it's not.
And time again, that's reinforced. You know, we live with this veneer of invincibility.
Yeah.
And this disease strips that off us. But we need to put our armour back on. You know, I've been looking after Phil.
Yeah, for what, 10, 11 years?
Yeah, for many years. And my longest survivor at the moment is 36 years. So I have numerous long survivors, and that goes down to the biology of what we could be calling motor neuron diseases. It's not one disease. It's multiple diseases.
Multiple.
Whether it's genetic or sporadic, or whether there are other conditions that look like motor neuron disease.
Another good bloke is Tim Eggart. Now, Tim does that 4 to 5 hour drive to see you, and then the 4 to 5 hour drive back.
Yeah.
I said, Tim, does it do your head in? He said, mate, I was a cop. I'm used to sitting in cars.
No, he's a good lad. And, you know, we did the Australian story at the end.
I was about to talk about that.
With Fiona and Rocky and, you know, Janine, the executive producer and the producer on the program. Well, she was the producer on the program, did just such an amazing job in that. They cut 35 hours down to 30 minutes, and they kept the nuance. It was right to the heart of the matter. And, you know, as I said to Fiona in a bit, as I said to Janine in a bit that ended up on the cutting room floor, you know, you can replicate this story with the 200 people that I look after. So, because Janine made the comment, these are exceptional people, and I said, they're all exceptional people.
Yeah.
So, you know, we could have randomly picked out another 40, 50, 60, 70 names, and the story would have been just as compelling as Fiona's story and Rocky's story.
That story was so good because so many people saw it, and it really increased the awareness of MND. And now when I say MND, people say, did you see Australian Story? It's amazing.
That's the fourth Australian story that I've done.
Yeah.
And, you know, Janine and the Australian Story team, just a really, it's a remarkable documentary style. The fact that the machinery, the process, is invisible to the story and to the audience. It's all first person, a third person reportage, and it's really an extraordinary thing. So, you know, Janine very, very kindly, so all the hours and hours of footage of Rocky and his family.
Yeah.
She's sent all the original footage to Linda.
Good.
And it's really quite an extraordinary thing to see.
It is.
The next day down in Leeton with Rocky's family, Rocky invited me to lunch at his mum's place, Nonna's place. So I actually happened to look after Rocky's sister with a different condition, which is just as difficult as motor neuron disease. And Nonna took me for a walk up into the back of the garden, and she was holding my hand and she said, "You can't fix my babies, can you?" And I said, "No, I can't." I said, "But I'll look after them." She said, "Thank you."
Did you get in the car and cry?
Look, the tragedy of the situation that my patients are in does have a personal impact. I try to keep it together, hold it together, not have the come aparts. So I have the medical students come and sit in with me through the year, which is a real delight. They're lovely young people, but it is a tough day. So I had this young medical student in with me last year, and we had a MND day, which is, I start out the day by saying, this is a tough day. No two of these people are the same. They all come with their unique issues through the prism of the person and their social circumstances, and that's what we need to try and look at today. Anyhow, at the end of this day, this young medical student, she looked at me and she burst into tears. And she apologised. And I said, "Abs, you mustn't apologise. You mustn't apologise for having a normal human emotional response."
Yeah.
And I said, the reason that you're in this field as a medical student, second year medical student, second, third year, doesn't matter. If you didn't have this emotional response, you shouldn't be doing the course.
Yeah, leave.
So, you know, I do talk to the students about the emotional dimension of it. You know, fortunately, the sort of other parts of my life, the running the farm with cattle and all that sort of stuff is you know, a tremendous salve for that circumstance that we deal with, this trench warfare. This is warfare that we deal with day to day.
Well, I want to say thank you that you're fighting for us.
Well, you know, if you sit in the armchair and let this stuff destroy people and destroy their lives, because I've seen what happens. You've been on the other end of poor care.
Yeah.
You had to transfer your husband from a major hospital to my hospital to be allowed to die.
Yep.
That's obscene.
It was obscene. And I don't know if you know this, but we also went into code red that day. stupid fucking COVID co-read. Anyway, down in the reception of the uni, I had security guards surrounding me and nurses surrounding me saying, "You're not allowed in the hospital. You're not allowed in the hospital. Get out, get out." And I said, "See that man? That's my husband. He is dying. I promised I would be with him when he died." And then they was coming closer and closer and closer. And I just said to them, "Do you know what? You lot can all get fucked." And I ran in the lift, and the ambulance people ran in with me and said, "Good girl." And then the minute I saw you, I knew I was safe. I knew I could stay with him.
Yeah, well, I can't tell you how many hundreds of times we broke COVID protocols in the hospital because,
Good.
like I said before, we threw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
And it's anyhow, the complete lack of reflection over the stupidity that was promulgated in that era is not, doesn't fill one with confidence that when the next little bug,
when it happens, that we're going to be any different. Yeah.
Yeah, well, hopefully we will be.
You know what will be different next time is the general public.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we did escape lightly because of the public and health measures that were put in the first year. So we had 700 odd, maybe 900, maybe 700, depends on how you count it, deaths in 2020. You know, the United States had 10 million deaths. So we escaped pretty lightly because we're an island, and they did put in public health measures really pretty much at a state-by-state level. It was the mismanagement at the federal level was breathtaking. But the states did do stuff. It will be argued as to whether it was overkill or not, but at least we did avoid the terrible death toll that occurred in other jurisdictions around the world. But I bring back the comparison between motor neurone disease and road deaths. So let's just forget about the COVID thing. In 2020, almost as many people died of motor neurone disease in New South Wales as died in fatal road traffic accidents. We know why people die in road traffic accidents. We have no idea why Robert got motor neurone disease.
No, none. We don't.
We know it wasn't genetic because we've done that work.
Yep.
So we know that there's no risk beyond that. But if you hold me down and say, why did he get it? Unfortunately, still in this day and age, we have to say we don't know. And that's completely unacceptable.
It is totally and absolutely unacceptable. Now, my final question. Bow ties.
Yeah.
Why do you wear them?
It's a nod to my grandfather. So I got given my first bow tie at 16 by my great aunt, my grandfather's older sister, Aunt Eddie, who was a war bride in World War II and lived her life in Sacramento, California. But she used to come out to Sydney once a year. And at the age of 16, she gave me a bow tie and she said, a proper bow tie.
Like, you know how to tie a bow tie, not just
she said, you have to learn how to tie a bow tie. She said, you have to learn how to tie a bow tie. So I learned how to tie a bow tie then at 16. When my grandfather died suddenly in 1995, we were overseas. I was working in London at Queen Square. And one of the things that I got given from his estate was that he had this big collection of hand-tied hunt bow ties from the 60s, 70s. And so I got given all these bow ties, 30, 40 bow ties. And so I started, when I came back into consultant practice in 1998, I didn't wear bow ties in Houston because I was basically a lab rat. I was, in T-shirts and jeans, boots and, working with gels and protein chemistry and all that sort of stuff. So when I came back into consultant practice, I started wearing bow ties and haven't stopped. So I'll get also
your brand now too.
Yeah, look, it can sometimes be a disguise as well. So when I'm not wearing a bow tie, often people don't recognize.
Recognize you.
But, you know, it's also theatre paint.
Yeah.
So, you know, Richard talked about
Mm.
his love of fashion from an early age. I'm not a lover of fashion. My wife Sal is a tremendous person. She gets a little bit irritated because I buy my shirts from the same supplier. I buy 6 a year. I buy you know, a new suit every 2 years. I wear RM Williams boots that last forever.
Mm.
And she says to me, you know, when are you going to change it up?
Because Sal's a bit of a fashionista, isn't she? From
Well,
her background.
she does. She, you know, likes clothes. She used to work for Louis Vuitton, and she
Yeah.
was the Australian buyer for Louis Vuitton and for Loewe, which is a French, sorry, a Spanish fashion label.
Yep.
You know, less and less these days. So as we get older, you know, Sal, you know, buys more for grandkids and for our kids than she will for herself. These days she hardly ever buys anything for herself. She got the shits with me many years ago. We were in New Orleans, and so New Orleans has this little tax break for artists.
Okay.
If you buy stuff that's made in New Orleans by New Orleans artists, it's exempt from sales tax.
Oh.
So we walked past this silversmith shop, and there was a beautiful little pair of cufflinks. And I saw them and said, oh, look at those cufflinks, aren't they nice? And she said, well, why don't you go in and price them? And I said, oh, no, I've got plenty of cufflinks, don't need any cufflinks. You know, I wear cufflinks every day. She said, look, just go in and buy them. You never buy anything for yourself.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, no, I've got plenty of cufflinks. And we walked on back to the hotel. The next day I was walking back the same way by myself. And so I stopped off in the same shop and asked to see the cufflinks, and they were gone.
Oh.
And so I said, you know, you had that pair of mallard duck cufflinks in the window. He said, oh, you know, they were unique, only one handmade, one of a kind. He said, can I interest you in anything else? And I said, oh, no, look, it's just wasn't meant to be.
Yeah.
And I got back to the hotel and said, said to Sal, oh, you know, I actually did stop off to price those cufflinks, and they weren't there. And Sal went, oh, that's a pity. You should really strike while the iron's hot. She said, you know, that's a lesson to you in the future. If you see something, you should at least price it. And now you've lost it. They're gone forever.
That's
you
it.
know.
You're
So
a loser, mate.
Laid it on thick with a trowel.
The
next month was my birthday.
Oh, and you'd probably forgotten about it by then.
And so the mallard cufflinks turned up for my birthday.
Good one, Sal.
Yeah. So, you know, so that's where the bow ties come from. Many years ago, I had a patient come in to me. He said, I've worked out why you wear bow ties. And I said, rafters, really? Rafters? You've worked out why I wear bow ties? He said, yep. He said, it's your version of a Hawaiian shirt.
Yeah.
And I said, well, there may be some truth in that, but I actually wear them as a nod to my grandfather, who was a funny man. He was a true learner. He had a voracious appetite for learning and knowledge.
Well, that's very much like you.
He's, as a young kid, you know, so he was a geographer by profession, but his passion was teaching teachers how to learn.
Whoa.
So he was at Sydney Teachers College for many, many years. And then he retired as the Registrar at University of New South Wales. But he wrote geography textbooks and all that sort of stuff. So, but he was fascinated by why people wanted to learn.
It's a really good question, actually.
Yeah. So it was all about inspiring, you know, smart kids to learn. And there's a big difference between the word teach and the word learn.
Huge difference. Dom, you've probably got to go and save some lives and stuff.
Yeah, well, it's at the moment we are seeing 2 to 3 new MND patients a week. We're actually, our bandwidth is pretty saturated at the moment, which is problematic. So the Brain and Mind Research Centre shut down its MND service in December. Westmead doesn't have an MND service.
Is that because of funding or lack of appropriate
I don't
qualified
know.
staff?
Don't know.
God's sake. Oh, fuck. Okay.
So it's pretty much just us now. There's a once a month clinic run by the team out at Liverpool that's Dennis Cordato and the team down there work on. But there's nothing at North Shore, nothing at Hornsby, nothing at Prince of Wales, nothing at St George, nothing at Penrith and Nepean.
I don't have the words to express how I'm feeling about that. It's like many days I feel like I'm banging my head against a brick wall.
Well, the people that you represent are very lucky to have you kicking people in the shins.
Thanks, Tom. I might aim a little higher some days too.
Well,
Well,
it never hurts to aim high.
All right. I'm so grateful to you and for you. And you are very special in our family, as I'm sure you are in many families. We love you.
Well, Robert's gargoyle sits on my shelf.
Mm-hmm.
So he sits like all the other little bits and bobs that I got given. I got given a replica whistle from the Titanic. And I said to the person who gave it to me, I said, what the fuck does that mean? It's just here.
Well, the Titanic's going down, so
I didn't quite know how to.
Okay. Have you ever used it inside?
Yeah. Good. Yeah, it makes a pretty good noise.
Okay.
So I don't know exactly what the message that was meant to be attached to it. It's like all gifts. There is a meaning there.
There's a meaning behind everyone.
The meaning, then they will.
Yeah.
And it's not for me to try and work it out, but it's lovely getting little gifts from patients. So this is an oil lamp from the Middle East.
Yep.
I have no idea how old it is. It could
Beautiful.
be 120 years old. It could be 1,000 years old.
But sitting in your office having that stuff when you're hearing terrible news, it's actually a good distraction to think, oh, I wonder where that came from. Oh, what's that? Oh, or you're trying to. I share this story all the time, and I'll just say it again. One day we were seeing Dom every 2 weeks, and one day Robert went in and you were holding his hand, and Robert said, "Has there been any progress in the last 2 weeks, Dom?" And you said, "Mate, you're fucked. Just face it."
I would never use such language.
Oh,
well,
God.
With Robert, in order to be able to work together, we had to align our way of thinking, and he refused to believe that it wasn't what he was told by the other neurologists. They kept on telling him that it was a radiculopathy.
Radiculopathy, yeah.
Right, and it wasn't.
No.
And so, I do use sometimes profanity to help shock people into the...
But it works. And as you said, you only use it with the appropriate people that you can get away with it. So it worked for him,
Yeah, look, I tried, I start each day, each week, each year with trying to limit my profanity, but I defy anyone who sees this disease up close and dirty to not swear.
I agree.
I got, after the Australian story, I got an email from, I got hundreds of emails after the Australian story, but one from this guy who took great exception to my language. He wrote this email. He said, "Sir," he said, "Sir, you dress quite well and you clearly know your subject, but your use of profanity is unacceptable." And I felt like I didn't reply. I just trashed the email, but I felt like replying, "Get fucked." But you know.
Well, yeah, I think I
that's
sent
sort
you,
of-
I sent you a text afterwards and said how great it was, and you said, "I think I used too many F-bombs." You didn't.
yeah.
It was perfect. All right, you go and have a day.
Radio, and great to see you, Jane. Keep fighting the fight.
Thank you, darling. And I will see you in the Blue Mountains this year.
Excellent. Look forward to it.
I'm so grateful to you.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Dom.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye.